So we can also use a very similar syntax to define a setter, an object accessor to set a property. And it will behave in a similar way where we write a method, right? We'll prefix it with the set keyword, but then it will be a method, and we can have logic in there. But then we treat it as if it's just a property. So I will be able to do something like this: player1.score equals that. But I could add in some logic to prevent you from doing this, which normally with just a boring old basic property, there's no logic that gets in the middle between you trying to change something and the change actually happening. But with a setter, we can actually intercept an invalid number, an invalid value, and say not so fast. So it looks like this. We use the set keyword, and then the same name if we want to use score in both cases, which I do. I want it to be player1.score to get it, and player1.score equals something to set it. But then we accept a parameter. So I'd call this, new score. And then I could just say this dot private method or private property score equals new score. But I'm actually going to start by saying if, let's say you can't have a negative score. New score is less than 0. If that's the case, then I'll throw a new error or something. Score must be positive. Technically, it can be 0, and I don't think 0 is positive. I don't know how that works, but let's just say score must be positive. And then if this was not the case, then we'll update score. So now we have this logic in here that kind of gets in the middle of me trying to set the value and then the value actually being set. So let's try it here. If I try and set score using a negative number, what do we see? Score must be positive. We got an error. However, if I do something that's allowed, like this, 324, score is updated to 324. So now we have this thing that looks like a regular old property, right? Player1.score. I can retrieve it, and player1.score, I can update it. And it's behaving as if it was just a plain old, primitive property, but there's this extra logic that's in the way. That's it's helping us, right? It's wrapping it and checking to see if you're doing an allowed number, if you're providing an allowed new score. So it's pretty cool, these getters and setters, and I should mention, our full name property is behaving as if there was a property called full name, right? That's just always set to blue steel or whatever our first and last are, but it's actually computed, right? It's the result of taking the first, adding a space, and adding a last. We could even create a setter so that if you set full name, it could actually update first and last. I don't know if we really want that, but set full name, we'll expect a new name, and then we'll split it. So that will be new name dot split. We'll split it on the space. So if you pass someone in like Amy Adams, we would split on this, and then we'll have two elements in an array, right? So then I could do something like const first, I'll just destructure, comma last equals the result from that array, and then we'll say this dot first equals first, this dot last equals last. And let's test that out. So now if I try and update, I'm just going to comment everything else out. But we take our player1 here, blue steel, and then I call player1 dot, let's console.log their full name. And then on the next line, let's say player1 dot full name is now equal to Amy Adams. So we're not actually setting a property called full name equal to that. Behind the scenes, this is going to be split, and we're setting first to be that and last to be that. And then if I just print out player1 and go over here, what do we see? We see first is set to Amy and last is set to Adams. So full name used to be blue steel, and now you can see down here it's still just a method, but we treat it as if it was a property. And that means I can do player1 dot full name without the parens. And then I can change full name to be my name. And this implementation is not great. And would you really do this? I don't know. I think it'd be better just to have you change first and last independently and maybe not have a setter for full name, but then have a getter like we do for full name that combines the two. And now I look at player1 again. Player1 dot first is Colt. and just look at player one overall. Last is set to steal. Okay, so that's the setter syntax. Also a nice feature that we have in JavaScript. And this is a pretty common pattern. Have some private thing, like score in our case, that you can't touch from outside the class, but then wrap it up with a getter and a setter, put a little bubble wrap around it so that we can protect it, but still give a user or give a developer access to it as long as they meet our requirements, right? As long as score is positive in our case, then we'll update score. But we don't allow somebody to come in and just directly access player1 dot our private score. You can't even access, it doesn't exist outside. Anyway, that's getters and setters.